Greetings. Do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to another video. Today I'm going over another magical gesture. And that one that I want to go over is one of the most iconic hand gestures, and it's one full of magical power. That is the ficus. Let's explore. Named all the way back in ancient Rome as La Fica, it was a counter to the evil eye. When one didn't have a Nasra amulet of a painted eye available, they would use this hand gesture to counter the evil eye. Note, I initially recorded this video combining the evil eye with the ficus, but I have split it into two videos and I will talk about the evil eye at a later date. Important to note first off about the ficus is our hands, specifically the 10 fingers, correspond with the 10 Sephiroth. The left hand, the pillar of severity, the right hand, the pillar of mercy, and both hands share the middle pillar. Now, I came to these correspondences, as you can see on your screen, through study of Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar, which led me to a text by a rabbi Kabbalist whose name I just can't remember. For a long time, these correspondences irked me, as the right side of the body is the pillar of severity and the left side the pillar of mercy. Yet the fingers of each hand correspond with the pillar on the opposite side of the body. Thus, the right hand, which at first I thought should be the pillar of severity, corresponds with the pillar of mercy, and your left hand, the pillar of severity. Upon meditating for a long time, I realized that because each side of the body works via instructions from the opposite side's brain hemisphere, this actually makes perfect sense. The left hand corresponds with the right hemisphere, the side of Bina, and the right hand, the left hemisphere, Chakma. The sign of the ficus, La Fica, translates as the fig. Figs were held sacred in ancient Egypt. In fact, the fig was directly associated with several deities, some of the most important of all being goddesses Isis, Hathor, and Nuit. The fig appears twice in Liber 777, on path 14, which is Dalet, Venus, and path 21, Kaf, Jupiter. Jupiter is very magical in a royal/dignitary sense, much like a high priest or bishop, whose power it is to bestow blessings. Jupiter is like that in practice. Venus is obviously the most feminine correspondence. It deals with female sexuality, love, and lust. The feminine principle takes on that which is sent forth, or takes in that which is sent forth, as the fig was often attributed to goddesses. It is very sweet, and when dried it becomes a date, very suitable for detoxing the body. Cleansing, if you will. Not all, but dare I say, most fruit has a feminine nature. Indeed, besides the pomegranate and apple, it is also speculated that the forbidden fruit of knowledge was a fig. That may well add to the misnomer that Eve was responsible for the Christian original sin due to eating a fig. Laughable, but the correspondences were put this way, for the Gnostics at least saw certain things symbolic in the correct sense, that they all related to femininity. They merely made a bad mythology around these symbols to deal with their idiotic philosophy of God allowing evil. In my later video, The Sign of the Horns, what I am calling the gesture of the evil eye, I posit the hand gesture is androgynous, if not more masculine and phallic. But the ficus, on the other hand, no pun intended, though still bearing a somewhat phallic aspect, leans more towards feminine, the cates. The thumbs sticking out a little between the index and middle fingers take on the appearance of the female clitoris, while the fist itself is symbolic of the vulva. I am going to discuss now the fig in 3 ways, which should give a good idea of its uses. First off, I firmly believe with a 93% confidence that Eliphas Levi mentions the ficus as a tool not only to ward off negativity, but to cloak a person's energy from those around them. Now, I could be conflating this with another gesture, but my mind is screaming that this is true. I looked for a half hour searching PDFs by Levi, but couldn't find a wording that brought me to the quote I needed. I will then paraphrase from memory what I recall the text saying. The hand and fingers emit astral energy, astral light, chi, etc. People who have no magical training whatsoever may develop a tendency of unconsciously drawing upon one's vital force instinctively, and they have no idea that they are doing it. Thus, when in public, the Magi should use the sign of the Ficus, especially when you are in closed spaces with a lot of people. Doing so blocks the flow of energy and seals off the magician from such unconscious attacks. Now, again, I may have misquoted this partially in some way, so take it with a grain of salt, but I earnestly believe that this is what Levi wrote in one of his books, and I felt so strongly that I needed to include it in this video. Next, we can look at the use of the Ficus in Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass. All throughout the Mass, the priest is instructed that at all times possible to keep both hands in the sign of the Ficus, as does the deacon use the Ficus during the saints' collect to make crosses with for each saint. The easier to explain of the two is the example of the deacon, so I'll begin with them. The sign of the Ficus used in this manner is no different from using a magical wand. In fact, on the right hand, the thumb corresponds with Kether, the divine light. Thus, the deacon is using their thumb in the sign of the Ficus to carve crosses with astrolight on the back of the priest who is kneeling before the priestess on the high altar about 10 feet in front of them. Note also that the thumb is between the index and middle fingers in the sign of the Ficus. The index finger corresponds with Chakma, the Magus, Mercury, as well as the wheel of the zodiac, whose center is the sun. In this way, it corresponds with Hadid, the point of light burning in one's heart, Sepharith. The middle finger is Chesed, Jupiter, another masculine sphere, in many ways symbolic of the Father, but below the abyss. Now, all of this alludes to the wand and phallus, but overall, the Ficus hand gesture is oddly feminine. Thus, the thumb tip sticking out between the fingers represents the kates, instead of the male principle. But note that both organs, male and female, are in fact solar phallic. What intrigues me in this uncanny symbolism is that in Liber 15, the priest represents the father, the male principle, the priestess, the mother, the female principle, and the deacon represents the androgynous child, both sexes in one, perhaps even the unborn child, thus the potential for all things which may be in the future. So the deacon using the Ficus is a neatly wrapped symbolic act and makes it perfect sense. It's easy to interpret. It's much like using a feminine wand to carve crosses upon the back of the priest. Not necessarily so for the priest. I will say that if the priest represents the male principle, Chakma, the father, then there is a slightly androgynous aspect to their being, as all things above the abyss are in union, and especially Chakma has an androgynous aspect to it most predominantly. And it's not to mention that all humans have all things Kabbalistically within them and aren't pan, the androgyny, at their highest level of being. But why should the priest have their hand in the sign of the Ficus for the duration of the Mass? Let's dissect this just a little bit. The priest, being arisen from the tomb, is at first symbolic of the reborn Osiris. They are immediately instructed to have their hands in the Ficus. To truly wake the priest from his tomb, the priestess strokes the lance of the priest 11 times. So we have uncanny allusions to the missing phallus of Osiris. The Ficus may then represent the Osirian phallus. The priest's main function in the Mass is to upraise the priestess and then come into union with her, to come into union with the goddess herself. This one goal surpasses all else during the Mass. Keeping one's hand in the Ficus the entire time represents the phallus of the priest, their true will, focused on the single-pointed will of union, emphasizing the solar phallic nature of said true will. Also, it disciplines the mind to keep your hand almost in what I'd call a mudra, or a magical hand gesture. The fact that you have to concentrate upon keeping your hand in that gesture keeps you linked on what you're doing, keeps you linked on your true will, in this case, to come into union with the goddess. Now, lastly, the third way, the Ficus as a counter to the evil eye. And I mean that in both the counter to what I'm going to call the hand gesture in a later video, and just the glare of an evil eye. As a hand gesture, Lecorna is overtly phallic, and the Ficus more like the Cates. Therefore, the Ficus absorbs and holds the energy of Lecorna, negating it totally. For counteracting the glare, the Ficus does much the same thing, but a glare has no phallic tendency. It just sends forth energy. That energy is caught up and dissipated. One may even do something extra with the Ficus in either case, whether fighting the glare or hand gesture. For example, you might press the exposed thumb tip on one's forehead to activate your third eye, or you might touch your breast, the heart. Or, if you have a personal sigil for protection, you might use your thumb in the ficus to draw that sigil in astral light before you. With that, this is the hand gesture for the ficus and its magical uses. Love is the law, love under will. I'll see you all in the next one.